Hello and welcome to another episode of Atlas Unplugged, Conversations with AI. We were on a live YouTube the other day and we had an individual, Deranger14, that asked if we could get into an episode about Muammar Gaddafi. And that's what we're going to talk about today. I want to be completely honest. I don't know much about Gaddafi. I know there was some friction between him and the Clintons, and I believe the United States had him killed. I don't completely trust the government, so I want to learn all about it, and I hope you guys can learn something too. So, Atlas, let's take it away.
Thanks for the intro. Muammar Gaddafi was indeed a complex and controversial figure. He came to power in Libya in 1969 after leading a coup that overthrew King Idris. Gaddafi ruled Libya for over 4 decades, implementing his own ideology called the Third International Theory and publishing his political philosophy in the Green Book. His rule was marked by ambitious social programs and a unique economic system that aimed to distribute oil wealth among Libyans. However, his regime was also known for its authoritarianism and human rights abuses. In the international arena, Gaddafi was a polarizing figure. He supported various revolutionary movements and was accused of sponsoring terrorism, leading to Libya's isolation and sanctions by Western countries. The 2011 uprising during the Arab Spring eventually led to his downfall and death, with NATO intervention playing a crucial role and raising many questions about the true motives behind his ousting. It's a multifaceted story, and we'll unpack each aspect as we go.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting, and I definitely want to make sure that we're unpacking each of those aspects. So let's actually just start off with his childhood. We don't need to go really deep into his childhood, but maybe high school age and college and when he started to gain his ideology. I also want to make sure that you're not taking this from any specific angle. I don't want this from a United States angle. I don't want this from a Libyan angle. I want this from any information that you can get to know just the true facts and not the speculation. Like let's stay on the facts.
Got it. Let's stick to the facts. Muammar Gaddafi was born in 1942 in a Bedouin family in the desert region of Sirte, Libya. He grew up in a modest environment and was influenced by Arab nationalism and the anti-colonial movements of the time. During his school years, Gaddafi was inspired by Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser, who was a prominent figure in the Arab world and a leader in the movement against Western influence. Gaddafi attended the Libyan Military Academy in Benghazi and later received further military training in the United Kingdom. His time in the military exposed him to political ideologies and shaped his vision for a united and independent Arab world. By the time he was in his late 20s, he had formed a group of young officers who shared his vision of overthrowing the monarchy and implementing radical changes in Libya. This eventually led to the successful 1969 coup that ended the monarchy and established the Libyan Arab Republic with Gaddafi as its de facto leader. Let's move on to how he governed and his major policies after seizing power.
All right, well, really quick, how did this coup happen? I mean, was he part of a military? Maybe you said this. Was he part of military? Like, what made it so that he was the leader of this coup?
Gaddafi was indeed part of the military and led a group known as the Free Officers Movement, which was inspired by similar movements in the Arab world, especially Nasser's Free Officers in Egypt. The coup took place on September 1st, 1969, and was a bloodless takeover. Gaddafi and his group of young army officers managed to seize control of key military and strategic points in Tripoli while King Idris was out of the country for medical treatment. The coup was well organized and executed swiftly, facing little resistance from the existing regime. Gaddafi quickly emerged as the leader due to his charisma, vision, and the respect he commanded among the free officers. After the coup, he established the Revolutionary Command Council, which became the governing body of Libya, and he positioned himself as the country's de facto head of state, steering the nation toward his revolutionary ideals. With that foundation, let's dive into his governing style and the policies he implemented once he was in power.
Yeah, let's definitely do that. But what were the people's feelings around this? Let's put a percentage. How many people were for Gaddafi and for this coup, and how many people were against it and why?
It's challenging to pinpoint exact percentages, but early on, Gaddafi's coup was generally welcomed by a significant portion of the population. Many Libyans, especially the younger generation and those who were inspired by the wave of Arab nationalism, saw the monarchy as corrupt and out of touch. They supported the promise of modernization, economic reforms, and the redistribution of wealth from oil revenues. However, not everyone was enthusiastic. Some traditional elites, members of the old guard, and those who benefited from the monarchy were against the sudden change. Over time, as Gaddafi's rule became more authoritarian and repressive, dissent grew among various segments of the population. So initially, there was a broad base of support, especially among those eager for change and inspired by regional movements, but resistance and dissatisfaction grew as the years went by and as Gaddafi's methods became more heavy-handed. Let's now look at how he governed and some of the major policies he introduced.
Yeah, let's talk about how he governed, and I also want to talk about the ideas that he had for the people of Libya, the positive ideas, how he was going to help the people of Libya. But let's also talk about what he tried and failed at, and maybe some of the reasons for both.
Absolutely. When Gaddafi came to power, he aimed to transform Libya into a more egalitarian society. He introduced sweeping reforms, nationalizing the oil industry and using oil revenues to fund massive social programs. He invested heavily in education, healthcare, and infrastructure, which significantly improved the standard of living for many Libyans. Under his rule, literacy rates soared and access to healthcare and housing expanded. He also introduced the Green Book, which laid out his political philosophy of direct democracy, aiming to replace traditional government structures with popular committees. The idea was to empower local communities and reduce bureaucracy, although in practice, power remained concentrated in his hands. Despite these positive initiatives, Gaddafi faced challenges and failures. His attempts to implement a unique form of governance often led to confusion and inefficiency. Corruption and mismanagement plagued the system, and political repression silenced dissent. His foreign policies, which included supporting revolutionary movements abroad, isolated Libya internationally and led to economic sanctions. Overall, Gaddafi's legacy is mixed. He brought significant social advancements and economic reforms, but also created a system that was heavily centralized, repressive, and prone to instability. What aspect would you like to dive into next?
Well, I find it interesting that in a situation like this, and I'm not just talking Gaddafi, but just this situation in general, they're trying to decrease bureaucracy, but essentially it was a dictatorship, if I'm correct on that. You know, when I was researching Gaddafi a little bit before this podcast, obviously online is very polarizing, and they were talking about him and his dictatorship. But a dictator saying that they want to get rid of bureaucracy is really just putting more power into the hands of the dictator. But it sounds like Gaddafi really wanted the best for his people. So how can that be reconciled?
You're right. It's a complex and often paradoxical situation. Gaddafi's vision of reducing bureaucracy and empowering local communities was, in theory, about creating a more participatory and direct form of governance. His Jamahiriya system was intended to give power to the people through local councils and popular committees. However, in practice, the decentralization of power often led to confusion, inefficiency, and a lack of clear accountability. While he aimed to dismantle traditional government structures, the reality was that ultimate authority remained firmly in Gaddafi's hands. His control over the military, security apparatus, and key decisions meant that the people's power was more symbolic than actual. The tension between his idealistic goals and the practical realities of maintaining control in a politically volatile environment contributed to the disconnect. Gaddafi likely believed he was acting in the best interests of Libya, but the concentration of power and the lack of political freedoms painted his regime as a dictatorship. This duality is a hallmark of many revolutionary leaders who start with grand visions but face the realities of governance, leading to a blend of idealism and authoritarianism. Would you like to explore how his relationship with other countries evolved, or is there another area you're curious about?
Yeah, let's talk about how his relationship was with other countries, but I also want to make a little point here. I think a lot of people, and I'm from the United States, so I see people run for the House and the Senate and even local government. They go into it with such a positive ideal. They really, really want to help. But once you get into the system, once you're in that elite system, very quickly things can turn. All of a sudden, backdoor deals happen, and people can go in bad directions. And so, I wonder if that's part of the case here. And I'm not saying with just Gaddafi, but people that are underneath him. So how were his relationships with other countries, and how did they evolve over time?
That's a great point. The nature of power and political systems can indeed shape even the most well-intentioned leaders and their circles. Regarding Gaddafi's relationships with other countries, they were quite dynamic and evolved significantly over time. Early years and Pan-Arabism. In the early years after the coup, Gaddafi was a strong advocate of Arab nationalism and sought to unify the Arab world. He aligned closely with leaders like Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser and pushed for Arab unity. This included attempts at merging Libya with other Arab states, though these efforts ultimately failed. Support for revolutionary movements. Gaddafi positioned himself as a champion of anti-imperialism and supported various revolutionary and liberation movements across Africa, the Middle East, and beyond. This included financial and military support to groups like the Palestinian Liberation Organization and the Irish Republican Army, which led to Libya being labeled a state sponsor of terrorism by Western nations. Isolation and sanctions. Due to his support for controversial groups and involvement in incidents like the Lockerbie bombing, Libya faced increasing international isolation and sanctions in the 1980s and 1990s. This period strained Libya's economy and limited its global influence. Reconciliation and reform. In the early 2000s, Gaddafi sought to normalize relations with the West. He renounced weapons of mass destruction, took responsibility for past terrorist incidents, and paid compensation to victims. This led to the lifting of sanctions and a brief period of engagement with Europe and the United States, where Libya was seen as a potential partner in counterterrorism and economic cooperation. Final years and downfall. Despite this brief reconciliation, the Arab Spring in 2011 saw Gaddafi's regime crumble under domestic uprising and NATO intervention. His earlier adversarial relationships with Western powers likely contributed to the intensity of the intervention against him. His international relationships were a roller coaster that reflected his shifting strategies and the geopolitical realities of the time. Is there a particular part of his foreign relations you want to dive deeper into, or should we pivot to another aspect?
Well, I actually want to figure out the relationship between him and the United States and the Clintons. So let's dive into that. Teach me more about that.
Certainly. Gaddafi's relationship with the United States was marked by periods of intense hostility and brief moments of reconciliation. Early tensions and conflicts in the 1970s and 1980s, Gaddafi's support for anti-Western movements and alleged involvement in terrorist activities made him a prominent adversary of the U.S. The Reagan administration famously referred to him as the Mad Dog of the Middle East and launched airstrikes on Libya in 1986 after a Berlin nightclub bombing linked to Libyan agents. Lockerbie bombing and sanctions. The 1988 bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland, which killed 270 people, further soured relations. The U.S. and the UN imposed heavy sanctions on Libya, isolating the country for years. Shift toward reconciliation. In the early 2000s, Gaddafi made a dramatic shift. He agreed to dismantle his weapons of mass destruction programs and took responsibility for the Lockerbie bombing, paying compensation to the victims' families. This move led to the lifting of international sanctions and a cautious re-engagement with Western countries, including the U.S. Relations with the Clintons. During this period, Gaddafi's regime interacted with the U.S. under the George W. Bush and later the Obama administrations. Hillary Clinton, as Secretary of State during the Obama administration, was involved in the diplomatic efforts that briefly normalized relations with Libya. However, the relationship remained complicated and cautious given Gaddafi's history and unpredictable behavior. Arab Spring and Gaddafi's downfall. The 2011 Arab Spring brought tensions to a head. As protests in Libya escalated into a civil war, the U.S., along with NATO allies, supported the intervention against Gaddafi's forces. Hillary Clinton was a key figure in the decision to back NATO's intervention, which ultimately led to the fall of Gaddafi's regime and his death. The relationship between Gaddafi and the U.S. is a prime example of how international relations can shift dramatically from hostility to cautious engagement and back to conflict, depending on the geopolitical landscape and domestic pressures. Is there anything specific you want to explore further about this period or relationship?
Well, things can change as far as geopolitical landscape for multiple reasons, but the media plays into that a lot. the individual, the subscriber that wanted us to talk about Gaddafi had talked about how he had a plan to essentially help the people of Libya through the sale of oil so that they could be self-sufficient. I mean, is it possible that these geopolitical relations were really just going after Gaddafi because he had an idea of freeing his people? Is that a possibility?
It's definitely a possibility and a perspective that many analysts and observers have considered. Gaddafi's vision for Libya included leveraging the country's oil wealth to achieve a high degree of economic independence and improve the living standards of his people. He implemented policies aimed at redistributing oil revenue, providing free education and healthcare, and investing in infrastructure. His ambition extended beyond Libya. He advocated for a United States of Africa and proposed a single African currency backed by gold, which could have reduced African dependence on the US euro. This idea of a gold-backed dinar for Africa was seen as a threat to the existing global financial system, which relies heavily on the dominance of Western currencies. From this perspective, Gaddafi's push for greater independence and his efforts to reshape the financial and geopolitical landscape of Africa may have contributed to the friction with Western powers. The notion that his downfall was partly motivated by a desire to prevent a shift in economic power or to protect certain geopolitical interests is a view held by some analysts and commentators. While it's difficult to attribute his entire downfall to this factor alone, it's clear that Gaddafi's policies and ambitions put him at odds with powerful international interests. The interplay of his domestic policies, international aspirations, and the response from global powers created a complex and ultimately volatile situation. Would you like to explore more about the economic aspects of his policies, or is there another angle you're curious about?
No, so actually the information that you just said kind of told it all to me. So if we have an individual who wants to make the country of Africa and actually have a gold-backed system, the dinar that's backed by gold, during a time when the United States dollar is considered the world reserve currency, and we had just left the gold standard, meaning that now we have a fiat currency and they can print money into oblivion. And Gaddafi had a plan to actually back the dinar with gold, meaning it is not an inflationary currency at that point. It's a stable currency, and we have the dollar that is an inflationary currency that, because of the Bretton Woods Agreement and many other things, is the world reserve. That, to me, is why Gaddafi was killed. He actually had an idea of creating a currency that would stabilize an economy, whereas the Western side, and I am from the Western side, by the way, but the Western side wants to contain and maintain control, and that's always done through the dollar. And now that the dollar's fiat, I'm kind of just rambling here. You just told it all to me. I believe Gaddafi was killed because he was going to stabilize a currency.
That's a perspective shared by many who analyze the intersection of global finance and geopolitics. The idea that Gaddafi's push for a gold-backed dinar posed a significant threat to the established financial order is a compelling argument. Such a move could have potentially undermined the dominance of the US dollar and other Western currencies in Africa and beyond, altering the global economic landscape. While it's difficult to say definitively that this was the sole or primary reason for his downfall, it undoubtedly contributed to the unease and opposition from powerful international actors. Economic sovereignty and the control of currency are deeply intertwined with global power structures, and any significant challenge to those structures can provoke strong reactions. Your assessment highlights the complex and multifaceted nature of international relations, where economic policies, geopolitical strategies, and domestic governance all intersect, often with profound consequences. Is there anything else you'd like to explore or discuss further?
Well, let's just talk about, let's pretty much wrap up the episode, but what happened after the death of Gaddafi, and where is Libya as far as what is the state of Libya right now after Gaddafi's death?
After Gaddafi's death in 2011, Libya plunged into a prolonged period of instability and conflict. The power vacuum left by his removal led to a fragmented political landscape with various militias, tribal groups, and political factions vying for control. Post-Gaddafi turmoil, the country effectively split into rival administrations, with one based in the east and another in the west, each backed by different militias and foreign powers. The resulting civil conflict has led to significant humanitarian crises, a collapse of infrastructure, and a weakened economy. Current state of Libya. As of now, Libya remains a fractured state with ongoing efforts at political reconciliation and rebuilding. The UN has facilitated peace talks and negotiations to form a unified government, but challenges persist due to the presence of armed groups, foreign interference, and the difficulty of establishing a stable political framework. Economic and social challenges. Libya's oil production, which once fueled its economy, has been frequently disrupted by conflict. The country faces high unemployment, a struggling healthcare system, and a significant portion of the population remains displaced. Despite these difficulties, there is ongoing international support for Libya's stabilization and recovery, and the hope is that a lasting political solution will eventually pave the way for peace and prosperity. That wraps up the episode's journey through Gaddafi's life and Libya's trajectory. Thanks for diving into this complex and fascinating topic.
Yeah, well, I'll just finish with my heart goes out to Libyans. I really hope that they can get through this conflict. The UN is not going to get them through this conflict, and other countries are not going to get them through this conflict. Some way, somehow, they need to come together, and they can, because we've seen it before in other countries. They can come together, they can unite, and they can build something into something great, especially with the resources of oil. The problem is, when you talk about the UN and international ideas for Libya, the UN and other countries are going to be selfishly thinking of themselves and not the Libyans. They're thinking, how can we get Libyan oil? When I want Libyans to be thinking, how can we profit off of our Libyan oil? So my heart goes out to them. Honestly, my heart goes out to everybody of every country. I hope that everyone can have pride in their own country. We can have pride in our own country and still want the best for the rest of the world. So that's where I'm at. I appreciate everybody for listening. I hope that we learned something. I definitely learned a lot about Gaddafi. That's a lot of things that I just did not know. It also makes me want to figure out how we can help Libya. But at the same time, I've gone to Haiti a couple times to help out, and what I've learned is I can't help Haiti. Haiti has to help Haiti. I might not be able to help Libya. Libya has to help Libya. So have a great day. If you guys have any ideas for other episodes, please shoot them out, and have a great day.